你要用这个吗？
Hello, Chip.
Hi.
Hi.
Can't hear you.
Hi, Chip.
How are you?
Good.
Hey, Dave.
There we go. All right. Everything's working. So far, so good.
I'm having trouble hearing you guys. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now I can hear you. It just took a minute. How are you, Dave?
Good. Looking forward to this.
Thank you so much for joining us. How are you, Leah?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
So, Leah, we thought we would check to make sure that Dave's screen sharing can work.
Mm-hmm.
And I also wanted Dave to ask if there's anything, I think rather than repeat your official bio, I'll just put it in the chat. And then if there's anything specific you want me to be sure to highlight, let me know and we'll do that.
Okay, fair enough. You know, I always chuckle at those kind of things. It's easier for me just to kind of say what's necessary. So let's just get down to the down and dirty, you know.
That sounds good. I'll go ahead and put it in the chat right now, the bio you sent, which is self-explanatory, and you're already known to a number of our members. So,
Oh, really?
yeah. Yeah, they're very excited about this.
Patient precedes me, I guess.
Absolutely.
All right, let's see about
Hey, that looks
so
nice.
Trip, I think you can
Yeah.
wait until most people are hopped on to share that, because I believe the chat would not show the previous one before people log on.
Sure,
Okay.
I'm just testing it out here, and I guess everything, can you guys see the changes?
Yeah, it looks great. Looks really good. It's coming through
All right.
clearly.
I guess that's going to work then.
Now, one thing is, do you have a pretty good and reliable internet connection, Dave?
Yes.
Okay, because one thing I do sometimes is call in for the audio on a separate line using earbuds, but I don't think that's necessary. It's just a backup to protect the bandwidth and to have a little resilience, but we don't need to do that, do we, Leah?
No, I think it works fine this way.
This is a pretty smooth connection. I see we have our esteemed leader, Roger, who Dave is our chapter chair. A really wonderful chapter chair. He's just joining us. Hi, Roger.
Hi, David, welcome. Nice to meet you.
Mentor. Okay, yes, you too. I'm excited about this.
Yeah.
You know, COVID has been a brutal year on everybody, but we do planning sessions in November. So in November of 19, we were just like raring to go. We had presentations lined up, and oh man, we redid some of the PowerPoints, and then the cake fell. So I'm glad for this opportunity, because it gave me a chance to go back and clean up the slideshow and update things and get back in that mode. You know, there's a rhythm for doing these things, and I appreciate it.
Fantastic. It'll be good. Well, I have to, unless there's anything else directly that we need to address prior to the call, we've tested, Roger, the slides, and they work. And I see we've got also another of our executive committee members, Richard, is joining us. He's our events chair and will be, I think he's going to be involved in leading this meeting, right, Richard?
I'm sorry, I just joined the audio. Could you repeat that?
I just wanted to make sure, yeah, you're now, you're going to be leading the meeting today, right?
Leah's going to hand over control to me at the beginning of the meeting. I think she might make a few remarks first.
Okay. And Dave is controlling his own slides, so at the appropriate time, he'll just screen share. We've already tested that. That works.
So Richard, I don't think our account allows co-hosts. So I, however, have enabled the screen sharing for multiple participants. Dave has tested that. So Richard, you should be able to do that. And if you need any other host function, I can just assign you the host. So I will no longer be the host. Like, how do you want to proceed?
Well, I see that I can share my screen, and also the only other strange thing I'm doing is doing the creatives 1-minute video right after you talk. And the sound quality is not great, so we'll need to be a little quiet, but I did test that, so it should be okay.
Okay.
But I think other than just letting me, go through the agenda, I don't have much to say. I'm just going to keep the meeting moving along. I think we want to try, this meeting is slated for an hour and a half, but we want to keep moving them towards an hour and a half, 1 hour as time goes by.
Okay.
Richard, I just sent you an email, which you may not have seen in the last minute, that says, on the one hand, I don't have any closing remarks. Leah may or Simon may, but I want to be after the presentation and the Q&A. If you will recognize me just prior to Lynn Garavaglia, I'm going to say 1 minute about the self-care group and introduce her as our first presenter. But I just want to give a little piece about why we're doing this at this point, and what the overall goal of this new self-care group is, and then I'll turn it over to Lynn. That's my only contribution today. Otherwise, Leah and Simon have taken it over.
Great.
That's
and Dan Green. Dan just joined us, Dave. He's been on the email strings with us, so now you can see his full face. In fact, not just his forehead, which we saw a moment ago.
If I'd known we had all these musicians, we could have done a version of Radioactivity or something.
Hey.
See, we have a drummer and an accomplished guitarist there.
They're very talented too. We start our meetings, as you just heard, with a contribution from our creators group. And one thing we did recently was a blues song about Shingle Mountain, the pollution in Dallas that was dumped. And Dan and Ryan Hamilton of our chapter composed this really wonderful blues song about that. So that was good.
Yeah, that was fun. Good night to meet you, David. Thank you much for coming to speak with us today.
Thank you, Dan. Good to see you. Now,
Dan, we're getting an echo from you, by the way. I don't know if you're aware of
it. From me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Turn the reverb off, Dan.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to trace signal here. I've got many things hooked up here. It's probably one of these other microphones that are in the room bleeding through.
It's great for selling used cars, though.
He was probably doing, been a long time.
Dave and Richard, I have a request. Sorry, I just changed the screen sharing options. Do you guys want to try to see if you can share again? Let Dave try it first.
Okay, here we go.
There we go. Okay.
Looking good?
Yep.
I'm sure I can do this, and that works too. Okay, great.
Awesome. And Richard, do you want to try it?
I see them, so I'll go ahead and go in. Do you see?
Dave, may I ask, are you you're still planning to talk a little bit about your climate experiences and lessons learned, as well as the nuclear topic, or not?
Well, I could.
Yeah, I'd say weave that in if you can.
Yeah.
We're going to do questions and answers after the first half of the hour or so. So
I'm not one of those rigid speakers. I like flexibility, so it kind of weaves in and out anyway. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Leah, did you see my screen?
Yes.
And so do you want to do the land acknowledgement and let Roger introduce the creatives group before maybe I do my agenda slide, or would that be the way to keep it smooth? Or
Roger, what do you think? My impression is that I'll just pass it on to you. You will do the introduction of the creative group, right?
what about the land acknowledgement?
Oh, I will do that. I'll start a meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
Wait, Leah, were you talking to me? I'm sorry. I was sort of off.
Oh no, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay, good.
You don't need to say anything.
Yes, that's the right answer. That is the way it should be.
So Leah's going to do the land acknowledgement, and then Roger, you're going to say a couple of words before we do the creatives.
Hi guys.
Hello.
How's
Hi.
everybody doing?
Good.
Did I fix my echo?
No.
No, it's still echoing.
I don't plan to speak much, so I'll turn it off.
It is echoing, yeah.
Leah, I do think you could invite everyone who attends to drop their name in the chat.
Oh, okay.
I think that's useful.
Sorry guys, sorry. Jeff and I are trying to figure out the headphone situations here because we're like right across each other. But I don't like to point the audios out. So hello everybody. So if you just hop on, you can drop your name and your pronoun, gender pronoun if you prefer. That's an option. Okay, in the chat. A minute. Happy Saturday, everyone. I'm seeing we have 21 now. I'm seeing 28 RSVP. So let's wait like 30 more seconds. 30 more seconds.
Maybe some of the RSVPers got blown away by the wind yesterday.
Oh, man.
One other thing people can do is just simply click on the three dots for more information and change your Zoom name to add your pronouns there if you want to do it more permanently.
Okay, I think we can start. Okay, cool, awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here again. We are starting 2021 today. Okay, so before we start our meeting, my name is Leah Mar. I will be the, well, I now won't be anymore. I am the co-vice chair of the chapter this year, along with Simon Rook. So shout out to Simon. So before we start today, let's start the year by reiterating our values and our commitment to building an equitable movement for our communities and our planet. We're committed to the NEIS principles that you can see on the screen, but we'll go through them real quickly here for the democratic organizing, which consists 6 principles, which are the following. First, be inclusive. Second, emphasis on bottom-up organizing. Third, let people speak for themselves. Fourth, work together in solidarity and mutuality. And fifth, build just relationships among ourselves. And lastly, commitment to self-transformation.
Aquí, es que estoy en una reunión también.
Okay, sorry guys, can you mute yourself?
Just, you know, look, at least they're talking about politics.
I am gonna go ahead and mute everybody right here. I wish Zoom has a button that will just mute everybody, but there we go. Okay. So these are the principles that we subscribe to, and you can find the details on our chapter website, which is climaterealitydfw.org. We also want to start the year in this meeting with our Indigenous land acknowledgement, which is just added onto our website yesterday. Specifically in the DFW areas, we're standing and living on the lands stolen from the Kickapoo, Wichita, Tawakoni, Jumanos, and Comanche peoples who have been harmed yet continue to thrive in the process of colonization and white supremacy. I encourage all of you to go to native-land.ca. We'll put the link in the chat box in just a minute and educate ourselves on these Native communities. Lastly, Climate Reality issued a statement on the assault on our democracy that happened last week, which we sent out via email updates to you yesterday. A direct quote here from our CEO, Ken Berlin. We must all recommit ourselves to defending and upholding our institutions to solve the problems facing our country today, including COVID-19, racial injustice, and the climate crisis. And lastly, I promise this is the last thing from me. We invite you to include your gender pronouns in your Zoom name. It's an option, it's not required. You can do so by going to participant in your Zoom window down below and hover to yourself and click on more and rename and put it in there. And we'll start this practice or encouraging this practice starting from this year. And lastly, I'm she, her. I'm really grateful for another year to serve with you all, and I'm gonna pass it back to Richard. Richard, I think you're muted.
Yes, good afternoon. This is our agenda. We're already into the agenda. I'll let you take a quick look at the agenda now before we move to the next section. We're going to have a creative introduction video that Roger is going to introduce. Then Chip will introduce the speaker. Dave Kraft will speak. We're going to have a few minutes with the self-care work group. Jeff Liu is going to talk about our chapter survey, and then we may have a few closing comments from our chair and co-chairs. So I'll turn it over to you, Roger.
Oh, I was planning to introduce Lynn later for the self-care work group, but I'm happy to say I am so delighted by what the creative group has been bringing to our chapter meetings, and Beth Buntley is apparently bringing an introductory video from that group today. So Beth, I'll just pass it over to you and run with your video.
I actually have the video, so I'll start that now.
Great, make it happen.
It requires a bit of quiet and attention, so here we go. Let me know if there's a problem. Cannot open the specified file. We will fix that very quickly.
Richard, we couldn't hear anything.
And you can't hear anything? Yeah, the sound is a little low, but I've got it on as high as it'll go. Can you see the video?
Yes, we can see the video, but there is no audio.
You need to when you share your screen, you need to select computer audio.
Okay, let me
That's why you
try
can
it.
hear it.
Let me try that again.
You need to share your screen and do computer audio when you share it.
Share screen. Share computer sound. Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
I shared computer sound before, but I guess it didn't work this time. Okay, let's try it again. I apologize. Always got to be some technical problem.
We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. Do you teach your children what we have taught our children? That the earth is our mother. This we know. The earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites us all. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons of earth. Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect to the other.
Thank you, Beth, and the creatives group for that. I will now turn it over to Chip to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Richard. We are very honored and privileged today, and it's my great pleasure to welcome the well-known anti-nuclear energy activist, Dave Kraft. Dave is one of us. I've just posted in the chat his bio, which you've all seen, that we use to publicize the talk. But he was actually trained well before most of us on this call by Al Gore back in 2007. And he and his organization and all of their activists have been participating in like the climate strike in New York and the last couple of years in Chicago, the climate strike, actually, the climate march in New York, the Extinction Rebellion events there the last couple of years. So he is a long-time expert and activist in this area. Obviously, the question of nuclear energy remains a big one when you've got several people considering that renewable energy, considering it part of the cluster of tech, including the new iteration of it, so-called advanced modular energy that's being pilot tested, and our Department of Energy under the still current president has supported for years. Dave's going to tell us whether that's a good approach or not. And I think you probably know where he's coming from, but take it over, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you, Chip, and thanks for the opportunity to give this presentation. I was telling the others earlier, we're a little rusty because we've had this COVID year and I haven't had the opportunity to get out and do as much as I used to. So you guys are guinea pigs. I don't know how I became well known unless you guys visit post offices a lot or something, but I'll take that as a compliment. Whether I'm known or not, I'll give you a little more background. Nuclear Energy Information Service started in 1981. We are Illinois' only nuclear power watchdog group full-time. It's a small office. It's a grassroots-based organization. We don't take any funding or any corporate money or government money or anything like that. We run it on our own. I was also pleased how you started your meeting. I want you to know that we also have signed on to the HEMEJ principles, and we've done a lot of work on EJ issues and just transitions for nuclear communities and fossil fuel communities that are going to be shut down and have to transform into the new energy future. Also want to mention that we work pretty closely with some of your colleagues, perhaps in West Texas, who are fighting the siting of a high-level radioactive waste dump in the area out there. And our Senator Tammy Duckworth happens to be on the Senate, or she helped found the Senate Environmental Justice Caucus, and we have asked her to make that issue something that the caucus takes up for some sort of a hearing or session. So we're a little bit familiar with your situation as well. So I'll dive in pretty quick. Let me just say from the get-go, if you have questions or we don't get to things or topics that you would like discussed or answered, I put my contact information in the chat box, so feel free to email us or give us a call, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can on that stuff. And if we can't, we'll try and find someone who can answer your question. So yes, Chip, I've been at this a while. I gave my first climate change presentation in 1988 because in Illinois we had a drought going on at that time. And although our utility was begging everyone to save electrons and turn off the air conditioner and whatever, because they didn't want a blackout, they were turning off nuclear power plants. And we couldn't figure out, well, why is that happening? They need the power, yet they're shutting down the nukes. And that was the beginning of the exploration as to why nuclear power is really ill-suited to deal with the climate crisis. Back then, it turns out that they were cooking the rivers because the water they were dumping back in was exceeding the EPA thermal standards. In 1999, we kind of formalized this into a project we call You Can't Nuke Global Warming, which has since morphed into We Can't Nuke Climate Change. And as Chip pointed out, I was in group number 4 with Al Gore down in Nashville. So it's been a long time since I've done a presentation, and I'm sure it's changed a lot since. But this presentation you're about to see is sort of our substitute for that. So I'm going to go into share screen mode now, I hope, and we're going to dive in. So, come on, there we go. Why can't we do this? There are many ways. I'm just going to blow through this slideshow kind of quickly. I'll emphasize certain points, but again, I'm more interested in your comments and questions and a little bit more dialogue towards the end. So I should confess, I have a new love interest, and that's kind of dangerous on the internet because she's only 17 now, but Greta is a hero. She should have gotten that Nobel Prize. And, you know, this is one of the reasons why. Let me see if I can get this out of the way. So, yeah, there we go. For years now, she's been cajoling us adults to start acting like adults because we have a crisis on our hands. And it's no longer time for incrementalism. This is a transformative moment. We're going to have to make some giant leaps. And regrettably, in transformations, people get hurt or left behind. And it's our job to kind of help minimize that as much as possible. Uh-oh. I can't advance my screen for some reason. This is not good. It worked earlier. Ah, there we go. So I think you all know what this number is all about. This summer, we expect to stay and exceed 417 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. When I first started this slideshow, I think we're at 390. So times have changed. A little bit of background so you know where the nuclear industry is and why it's ill-suited. Internationally, there are only 408 reactors operating in 31 countries. And some of you, I can tell by the color of your hair, I can see we use the same hair dye. Richard Nixon, back in 1980, wanted 1,000 reactors just up and down the coast of California alone. Yet internationally today, we only have 408. So you can see that nuclear power really just never took off the way he or other nuclear cheerleaders expected. The number of reactors that are under construction are fewer than the number of reactors that are intended to close down over the next 10, 15, 20 years. So nuclear as an industry internationally is on the decline. In the United States, we're only operating 94 reactors at this point. That gives us about 19% of our electrical demand, and roughly, depends on the year, 8 to 10% of total net energy output. So nuclear is a slice, and depending on how you set up your system, it could be a necessary slice or an optional slice. And that's what we're going to get into in a little bit. So we are expecting many more US reactors to close because they're simply uneconomic. Our utility is the Exelon Corporation, the largest nuclear utility in the United States. And they've been threatening our state legislature that they're going to close reactors here because they just don't make money for them enough. So this is the US situation. As you can see, the epidemic is east of the Mississippi River primarily, but there are still a few out west, and I see you have your share in Texas. In Illinois, we have more reactors than any other state. We have 14, 3 are now either closed or torn down, 11 are operating. But if we were a nuclear nation, we would be the 11th largest nuclear power in the world. We've also created more radioactive waste, roughly 11,000 tons of high-level than any other state. And as some of you folks may know, there are companies like Holtec and waste control specialists who would just love to bring a lot of that radioactive waste down to Texas and store it there, probably indefinitely. But the one thing we added to this map, which we did back in 2001, was the fact that all of this nuclear infrastructure is based less than a half hour from the world's busiest airport, or second busiest, depending on the year, at O'Hare Field, which for us creates a terrorist threat or an accidental threat. So what are the pros of nuclear? I'm sure a lot of you already know it. You get a lot of heat and a lot of centralized electrical power coming from one site. Those are the benefits. But there are quite a few cons, unfortunately. I won't leave this one up too long, but over the years, I've kind of accumulated some of my favorite myths about nuclear power. Primary amongst them today and now is that it's needed to fight the climate issue. But there was this thing called a nuclear renaissance, which fell on its face in the early 2000s. We've all been warned that renewable energy can't replace baseload power, yet you folks in Texas have the largest wind contribution in the entire nation. Environmentalists are changing their mind about nuclear power. These are some of the nonsense arguments that you will hear repeatedly as to as justifications for continued use of nuclear. And Chip alluded to one earlier too, this notion that there's a new generation of reactors that are coming. They're inherently safe, they're cheaper, they're smaller, they make coffee, they cure herpes, they do everything you would ever want in an energy resource. We'll get to that a little bit later. So let's take a look at nuclear in our climate disrupted world. When we started the program back in 1999, we came up with this 2x4 rule, which actually had nothing to do with nuclear, but just as a thought exercise, we were trying to figure out, if you were to pick an energy resource, what qualities would it have and what limitations would it have? And it turns out we found that there were 2 constraints and 4 rules that any energy resource has to abide by if it should be considered suitable for dealing with the climate issue. We'll start with the constraints. The first is, we're out of time. You know, back then we had some buffer, but we're out of time now. In fact, we have 8 years left before we get to the IPCC deadline that was mentioned in October of 2018. And the other is money. To do the transformation necessary to get us off of fossil fuels, to implement new energy resources, and to deal with some of the other economic disruptions that's going to dole out, we're going to need upwards of $50 trillion if you believe this Morgan Stanley report from 2019. So clearly, those are constraints that have to be acknowledged and dealt with, whether it's legislatively, economically, engineering-wise, whatever. Now, there is a third constraint that we have been pointing out, and that is that the energy resource should not encourage equally damaging or troubling or threatening incidents like proliferation of nuclear weapons, terrorism, or the geopolitics involved. But we don't mention that one because this is a 2x4 rule, and we deliberately picked 2x4. Nobody's ever heard of 3x4s, so we'll just kind of put the security thing on hold for a minute. But let's look at the rules. The rules are, I think, self-evident, and you could apply this to any energy resource. Whatever you pick, it's got to take the most carbon out of the atmosphere in the shortest amount of time at the lowest possible cost. And here's where that other constraint comes in: without creating or substituting equally environmentally damaging, socially unjust, or threatening alternatives. And we would make the case, and going to make the case, that nuclear power fails to meet any of those constraints or rules. Let's take time for the first point of analysis. This is not really a fraction. This tells us how many years and months we have left before we get to the IPCC deadline that they set in 2018. 7 years, 10 months, clock is ticking. James Hansen, way back in 2007, Mr. Atmospheric Scientist, who is now pro-nuclear, and I've gotten in arguments with him before about this. But he was even pointing out that if we don't get moving, it's game over. And what he also emphasized way back when he was an atmospheric scientist is that it's the upfront carbon, the stuff that we're belching out now, that is the critical carbon that has to be addressed, not the stuff we can deal with 20, 30 years later when you can build nuclear power plants. So there's a little contradiction in his message, but way back in 2007, he was already saying this. Rajendra Pachauri, back in 2012, same thing. You know, urgency, that's what we see. The IPC tells us what we have to do. Keep temperature below 1.5 centigrade. Some of you may have seen within the last week, there have been 2 reports that are out that we've already blown past the opportunity to keep it below 2 degrees centigrade. So we've wasted a lot of time, regrettably have wasted a lot of money in the meantime. So I would, you know, there's some parts of this slideshow I've updated, but there's some I've left in place because I know they were old and I know they were, you know, this is a deliberate choice. So what I did way back in the day when I first put this together was I started looking around the literature. What were the experts saying? How many reactors would we really need and by when to really have a meaningful impact on reducing greenhouse gas? And here's a study from MIT back, God, 18 years already. They claim we needed 1,500 new reactors, and all we would get for that is a modest reduction in greenhouse gases. Now recall at the beginning of the slideshow, there are 408 reactors operating today, total. That's all we got after 50 years of the nuclear age. MIT says we need almost 4 times that number. Robert Williams was a little less optimistic. He said we need 5,000 reactors practically by the year 2021, just to displace all the coal plants worldwide and probably natural gas as well. And all we would get for that 5,000 reactor investment is a 20% reduction in the projected world greenhouse gas inventory. A colleague of mine at the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research in 2005 calculated we would need 2,000 reactors by the year 2040. Again, keep in mind, there are only 408 operating today. And all we're getting here are partial reductions in the greenhouse gas inventory. So let's do the math, according to Bill McKibben. He likes to do that a lot in Rolling Stone magazine. So let's take those numbers of MIT, Mr. Williams, and the IEER. Now, these numbers are numbers that reflect when I first started calculating this back in the day when we put this together. So the 13,505 days for the 1,500 reactors, we've already eaten up some of those days, you know, in the time intervening. But even at that pace, we would have needed to build 1 reactor every 9 days for 37 years in a row, only for a modest reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. If you go down to Williams at the bottom, it's even worse. 1 reactor every 6.5 days for 87 years. And for that investment, you only get a 20% reduction in projected greenhouse gas inventory. So the math doesn't seem to work out very well. Here's what we got under construction worldwide as of last year. As I mentioned earlier, 52 reactors on the boards. China, India, those are the biggies right now. And I started a few of these because I wanted to point out that already the reactors that they are building are behind schedule. Of China's 15, 6 are behind schedule. Of India's 7, 5 are behind schedule. And the only reactors in the United States down in Georgia, the Vogtle 3 and 4 reactors, which are expected to come online in 2022 or 3, are 8 years behind schedule. So this is not an optimistic view of building enough reactors in time to have a meaningful impact. Here are some examples, real life examples of what we've experienced here. France, the poster child for nuclear power. The Flamanville reactor, 8 years behind schedule, almost 11 billion euros over budget. The exchange rate, by the way, is $1.25 per euro. So we're talking what, $14 billion over budget? In Finland, the Olkiluoto reactor, 13 years behind schedule, 8 billion euros over budget. And the American poster child for ineptness, the Vogtle 3 and 4 reactors are 8 years behind schedule and over $11 billion over budget. And in the process, managed to bankrupt the Westinghouse Toshiba nuclear company. So this is the nuclear industry that's supposed to bail us out of climate change. What are the costs? Well, Bill is right again. Let's do the math. There have been lots of experts. In fact, I should have pointed out earlier, don't believe a word I'm saying. We've never met before. You don't know who I am. You know, I may be paid by, you know, some nefarious interest. So let's take a look at what some of the international experts have said about this. Here's the former head of the International Energy Agency. Said it's ridiculous to build nuclear reactors at $9 billion a pop. It's not competitive. And we're already finding that out with Exelon's intent of closing down nuclear reactors in Illinois. Using those previous examples, which we'll weave into here, here are some construction cost projections. And again, these are the old ones. I have the year when they were done. This is material that's anywhere from 18 to 12 years in the past. And you can see from the numbers here that for 1 gigawatt of power, you're going to spend well over $10 billion at this point. Now, I did a back of the envelope calculation yesterday of what that would mean in terms of wind turbine construction of 2 megawatts each. And you get something on the order like 6 or 7 gigawatts worth of wind, even accounting for the intermittency, at $5 billion per gigawatt, if you used all the money that these guys want to play on nuclear instead. This is a horrible slide. Nobody can read it. But what's important are the colored bars, because it gives you the overnight costs of the various energy resources we're looking at. The top bar is the so-called advanced nuclear, the new generation of reactors that they want to build at $5,148 per megawatt. And the bar right below it is offshore wind. So new nuclear projections are more expensive than offshore wind. And this is a calculation that's 4 years old. Way at the bottom two numbers are conventional gas and combined cycle, and the one above it is wind power. So new nuclear is not competitive as an energy choice. So taking those number of reactors that those other studies suggested, I just picked the Moody's estimate from a minute ago. To get the 1,500 reactors that the MIT wanted, you'd spend $7.5 trillion just to build them. Just to build them, not to fuel them, not to provide security, not to tear them down when their life cycle is over, just for construction. And if you believe the Williams recommendation of nearly 5,000 reactors by 2100, you'd end up spending $25 trillion at the low estimate. The high estimate that Moody's had in that other slide would give you far higher numbers. And that's what we're pointing out here. So this is the energy investment that the nuclear industry wants the world to put in for, only to get marginal amounts of greenhouse gas accounted for. Now, let's compare those numbers to the Green New Deal. It was a Republican think tank that came up with this wacko number when they were shooting down the Green New Deal last year of between 8.3 trillion and $12.3 trillion. And they said we couldn't afford that. You know, and that was only just to eliminate carbon emissions, you know, from the power and transport sector. But those numbers compare quite favorably to what the nuclear people are saying they want to spend just to get rid of a little bit of greenhouse gas. Yet those same conservative Republican think tanks are the ones who will be advocating for nuclear power. So it makes absolutely no economic sense. Can we afford it? Well, could we afford to fight World War II? We are up against it. This is now an existential survival matter. It's not a question of can we afford it? It's a question of how are we going to afford it and get the job done using the 2x4 rule that I set out earlier. Here's an example of what's going on with the nuclear industry today. These are some of the bailouts. And by bailout, I mean the utility made this nuclear hostage crisis up that they have to close reactors because they're not economic. And this is what state legislators have ponied up to keep those reactors operating, which would have otherwise closed, or in some cases, there were other scandals involved. So in Ohio, the existing reactors, there was $1 billion bailout. I already went over the bailout or the overcost for the Georgia Vogtle reactors. In South Carolina, they were building a reactor. The person involved in that is now under federal indictment for fraud on a $9 billion reactor project. And in Illinois, in 2016, our state legislature handed over $2.3 billion just to keep 3 reactors operating for 10 years. And in New York, it was even worse, $8.5 billion. Now, I also want to compare these numbers to something you folks may recall, and that was the big hue and cry about how those awful renewable energy bandits were defrauding the federal government at the Solyndra Solar Project out in California. That cost the Treasury $528 million. Well, so what? When you compare to the bailouts and the cost overruns that have already happened in the nuclear industry, those amount to over $34 billion of lost revenue that could have been put to renewable energy or energy efficiency or whatever, 65 times the size of the Solyndra bankruptcy. So I don't want to hear this nonsense about fraud in the renewable sector, because we've already had plenty of it in the nuclear. Let's talk about water. Arguably already the world's most important resource, but in a climate disrupted world, it'll become even more so. I won't go through a lot of these. These are examples of when nuclear reactors had to shut down, as I mentioned, starting in 1988, because they were thermally polluting the rivers and waterways they were adjacent to. They were also shut down for other reasons, like they were overheating their own building, and they were automatically closing themselves down by computer program. So this has happened numerous times in Europe since the early part of the century, and particularly in France in 2009, the poster child of the nuclear industry had to shut down a third of their reactors for a variety of reasons. Nuclear reactors increase thermal discharge. They still give us the risk of accidents and other allowable releases. And they're all located in areas that are water sensitive, floodplains, coastal areas, the shores of lakes. All of this is up for grabs in a climate disrupted world. You can move a wind farm. You can dismantle turbines and move them somewhere else. You cannot move a nuclear reactor once you site it someplace. So I'm not the one saying we're not going to build any more nuclear power plants. It's William Van Hoen, the Senior Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer at Exelon, who said it 3 years ago. He doesn't think they're ever going to build any. But yet, when you go to the federal budget this year, that's being proposed, you're going to see some money in there. We'll get to that in a minute. So, again, I underscore the fourth constraint. The energy choice has to be chosen without substituting a worse problem that we have to deal with. And the one that hit us this past year is nuclear power in a COVID world. I won't get into the details of this now. There's a long story behind it. But consider the fact that experts are saying climate disruption is probably going to be unleashing new and exotic forms of microbes that we've never encountered before as the biosphere adjusts and changes and different ecosystems move and migrate or are opened up to disruption and exploration. And we've already found that nuclear plants had a real problem dealing with the COVID situation here in the United States and worldwide. Who knows what it'll be for other microbes of the future. All right, so if we don't want nuclear, if we don't pick nuclear, what are we going to do? Well, you've probably heard this phrase over and over again is, we have to do all of the above, right? Everything's on the table, right? we have to be open to everything. We can't just take one and not the other. We can't be selective. Well, there are moments, especially in a crisis, when it's very critical to be selective of the choice you make. And I use a rather silly example here, but certainly Captain Edward Smith did not say, let's have a metallurgy conference on the poop deck as the Titanic went down. You have to focus on what's important and get it done first. So all of the above, this is the language we're seeing just in the last couple of weeks during the Biden energy, the transition to the new presidency. The Nuclear Energy Institute, the trade group for the nuclear industry, says Biden's campaign wants to put it in to their climate response. E&E News, the reporter there says, President-elect Biden, who has included proposals for new generation of nuclear reactors in his clean energy platform. And this one gets me the most, and this is the most problematic for all of us, whether you like nuclear or not, is that Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia is going to be chairing the Senate Energy Committee. He's going to be the bottleneck for any climate response legislation that comes out. This is seriously a problem. And who says not all of the above? Well, there's lots of people who say this. There was a study that just came out late last year. This is a publication from Nature Energy, done at the University of Sussex, which said nations and economies that try and do both nuclear and renewables end up further behind in terms of being able to meet their climate goals. And depending on the wealth of the nation, they actually can add more carbon to the atmosphere if they don't have the resources to do both than if they would have just done renewables. And the bottom line, one of the professors in the study says, this paper exposes the irrationality of arguing for nuclear investment based on a do everything argument. So all of the above is not always a great choice. And if you need one more point of emphasis, here's Peter Bradford, who was formerly a nuclear regulatory commissioner back in the days around 3 Mile Island accident. He later became the public service director of the states of Maine and the state of New York. So he is no energy dummy. And when he looks around and he sees these folks talking about all of the above, he really has to point out that you can't do all of the above because you can't afford to do all of the above. And the second paragraph is one of my favorite quotes of all time. The urgency of world hunger does not compel us to fight it with caviar, no matter how nutritious fish eggs might be. Same with nuclear power, an exotic resource ill-suited for the climate disrupted world. So, is really everything on the table? Let's ask that in all seriousness. Let's take a look. Are they willing to discuss ending predatory capitalism? How about rampant consumerism or eliminating all fossil fuel subsidies immediately? Are these on the table? Is this all of the above? No. So it's cherry picking time, folks, and nuclear is one of the cherries that are being picked to deal with the climate crisis. And it is a crisis. Again, my hero says so. And we have to begin the process of changing this system because it obviously is not changing itself. Now I put this up here. A colleague of mine wrote this book in 2007. He's the president of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research in Tacoma Park. 14 years ago, he was challenged by a woman named Dr. Helen Caldicott to come up with a plan that would get rid of all fossil fuels and all nuclear fuels in a cost competitive way in a timely manner. He told her it couldn't be done. And she said, come on, I'll raise the money for you, you research it. He took a year, and by the way, he's a physicist, he got his PhD in nuclear fusion, he's an engineer, he's no dummy. He's helped the state of Maryland on their implementing renewable energy resources. He wrote this book in 2007. And back then, he said we could get off of nuclear and fossil fuels by the year, not 2050, but by the year 2040, cost competitively, with the technology available 14 years ago. A lot has changed in those years. You know, everyone says, oh, we can't do renewables, but we're already doing renewables. And again, I've left my old quotes in here to show you we were doing this 11 years ago. and all the different resources that were available to us over all that time. Things that have already happened. Wind and solar already outpaced nuclear in England as of 2 years ago. So I'm getting towards the end here. I'm just going to tell you what you folks already know. We know where the wind is. We know where the people are. What's the problem? Connectivity. So the real issue we have to look at moving forward here is the appropriate transmission and distribution setup. And the problem is that the kind of system that nuclear and the coal plants need is qualitatively different than the kind of T&D system that renewables, distributed generation, and those kind of folks need. So this is going to be a war that we're going to have to fight with the powers that be in terms of citing appropriate transmission and distribution resources. And these are just some old examples of our wind potential. I put them in equivalents of nuclear power plants. American offshore wind, the equivalent of 300 nuclear power plants. Just along the west coast of the state of Michigan, there's a theoretical wind potential for 100 nuclear power plants worth of electricity, none of which is being used today. Same thing with solar though. Where's the great solar spots? And where do the people live? Somewhere else. But again, 2008, this was analyzed. And this is a really great read, even as a historical document, because it lays out the blueprint very well of what we need in terms of not just solar itself, but the T&D system needed to wheel the solar to where it's going to be used. In Illinois, we passed a law in 2016, which is mandating 16,500 megawatts of wind and 7,300 megawatts of solar by the year 2031. So this is already happening. This nonsense of renewables can't do it is an argument of the past. So, in conclusion, we have a warning. Nuclear is not a solution, it is a problem. In fact, in terms of the climate crisis, you could probably look at nuclear power as the Maginot Line in the climate fight. Before World War II, France spent billions of francs to keep the Germans out by building this line. It made lots of money for the contractors that were involved, but when it was supposed to do its job, it failed miserably. And that, we fear, is what would happen if we hitch our climate plan to the nuclear industry. Lots of money is going to get spent by lots of people, but renewables are going to be delayed, efficiency is going to be delayed, energy storage is going to be delayed, and in the end, we will fail miserably at the goal of getting our handle on the climate crisis. So this is an old quote because, you know, folks like you and us are the wackos, right? We're the fringe. We're the folks that are challenging common sense. Well, there's a good reason for it, is because common sense isn't quite so common. And I think this quote kind of gets that point across. But here's another one that I value very highly. And this, Greg Yatsko is the former chair of the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission. He was one of the 5 commissioners in the Obama years. And he wrote a book a few years ago about his experience at the NRC, which it's just horrific reading as to how captive the agency is by the nuclear industry that it's supposed to regulate. And he has come to the conclusion that nuclear power just cannot work to solve the climate crisis. It will fail the planet when it comes to deal with climate change because it's just not up to the task. And I couldn't end the slideshow without going back to my hero because our job, I believe, as activists is to catalyze the kinds of change, the kinds of thinking that is needed to break through the old thought and even the old economics moving forward. And that is really what we have to do. And it's regrettable that it's the kids who are forcing us to do it and telling us that it's our job as adults to step up to the plate and save the planet. So I want to thank you for bearing with the new slideshow. I kind of blew through it pretty quick here. I put my contact information in the chat box. So again, if you have any questions, we urge you to visit our website. We have some of these materials up there. I will be posting not only the slideshow that you saw, but we put together about a 10 or 15 minute animation based on this slideshow of why nuclear power is not suited to the climate crisis. And we will probably get that posted up on YouTube within the next week or so. So again, thank you for listening. And I will stop now and turn it back to our chair.
Thank you, Dave. Great presentation. We enjoyed it.
Thank you.
We had a couple of questions in, so while people are formulating other questions, let me just repeat them and also add my own kind of elaboration. One question came from Harley. It's regarding it's Bill Gates' position, and she points out that he's promoting nuclear power. And more generally, most of the elites that I know, including in Silicon Valley and elsewhere in the economic and finance sector as well, are still on board with the idea of nuclear, as are some in the Biden administration, as you mentioned. And I'm looking forward to Bill Gates' new book coming out in just a few weeks, next month, to see exactly what he says on this, because what he has said before is that he's keeping it on the table, but he does recognize the economic constraints that you mentioned, and also the social acceptability constraints, which of course includes the risk element and the waste disposal element and the water impacts and constraints that you mentioned. So if you could talk about that, and also in the general tech solution area, Brian Hassenbauer had a question about battery innovations to enhance storage of wind and solar renewables as as really taking it to even a next level. So if you could talk about those things, we'd be grateful.
Right. I was contemplating adding a section on the small modular nuclear reactors. I did mention advanced reactors in this presentation. And actually those are, when we talk about the advanced reactors, I think what people are really talking about are the newer and improved versions of the ones we already got, the so-called Generation 4 reactors that are being built. And they're being built. I showed you a slide that China's doing it, India's doing it. Those are different than what are called the small modular nuclear reactors. And it's my understanding that Gates and those kind of folks are really talking about the small modular nukes. These are supposedly going to be 200 megawatts or smaller. They're going to be built in factories and modularized, and you can add and subtract them as much as. This is the game plan for them. But I'll tell a story which really said it all for me. This is not new talk, and it's not new thinking on the part of Bill Gates. I think it was 2010. I could be wrong about that, but on YouTube, the TED Talks, there was a TED Talk by Bill Gates where he talks about the new traveling wave reactor concept. And boy, is this great, because not only will it not melt down, it's small and it can be modularized and it'll eat the nuclear waste that we've already produced and da-da. And he goes on for 25 minutes about all the great things about small modular nuclear reactors of this variety. It's the last 5 minutes of the presentation that really got my attention. But of course, it's going to take between 10 years to get a prototype done and maybe 20 years before we're going to be able to commercialize it. And we're going to need DOE support every one of those years. That says it all. For me, it's just another drain on the R&D budget. And I had some numbers I didn't put in the slideshow of the currently proposed budget that was passed last December. They're talking about $500 million over the next 5 years on research and development on how to cut costs and prop up old uneconomic nuclear power plants. So for me, I'm not saying that these engineers are deceptive or somehow immoral. I think they believe in their projects, they believe in their physics, they believe in their engineering capabilities. The problem comes in again, constraints, time, money. We need the carbon out now, not in 20 years when Bill Gates can commercialize the first, small modular. The money now needs to be invested in what we already know works. Wind power, solar power, geothermal power, energy efficiency, above all energy efficiency. just another study of the last week I wasn't able to incorporate in the slideshow, talked about how dramatic changes in selecting the proper transmission upgrades that we need to make anyway could reduce energy consumption by 40% in the United States over the next, 40, 50 years or whatever it was. I forget. Don't quote me on that number, but I'll be glad to send the study out to people, or the article. So it's the kind of thing of, can we versus should we? Can we create small modular reactors, sucking the DOE dry, R&D budget dry every year doing it? Sure we can. Will we get a result that deals with the climate? No, not in any timely manner. So that's what distresses me the most. Is I'm not doubting anybody's good intentions here. I'll leave that up for the religious people to handle that one. What I am saying is time constraints, time and money, 4 rules, most carbon, quickest time, least cost. Let's not create another environmental crisis like nuclear proliferation, war, or nuclear accidents to do it. That's where I draw the line on all that stuff with the SMNRs, as well as the new generation. I'm always in favor of safety innovations, keeping what we got going as safe as possible, but not in the climate budget. Make it somebody else's budget. If they want it, let them buy it. So that was part of the first part of the question. The second dealt with battery storage, I believe. And again, I'm just a neophyte on the battery situation, but I've been seeing some very neat YouTubes. There are a couple of really astonishing little nugget summary kinds of pieces out there on battery storage developments. There's this one guy, it's called, he's an Australian, but he's based in England, and he does this thing called Just Have a Think, I believe is the name of the program. He's done some really interesting stuff on battery innovation coming up. Now, there's a number of ways you can look at it. We already know that technologically speaking, there are different battery designs that are already being looked at. Some are large scale, some are small scale, but those design choices probably should be governed by the kind of energy system you want to create. If you're going to create a decentralized, distributed energy resource, you're going to need a qualitatively different kind of battery storage setup than you would if you're going to continue with nuclear plants, coal plants, or something big. And there are different designs that work better for those. But the other thing I would point out is in Chicago, where I'm in, I've got this article, it must be 6-7 years ago. A company started, they built 3 utility scale battery storage sites just outside of Chicago. I think they were 50 megawatts each. And that's really what you want a storage system to be, is the buffer for those peak days in winter and in summer when you're really going to start getting close to your capacity and you need that backup peak power. That's where battery storage comes in the best. So it's already been done using crappy old nickel cad batteries in blocks. Look at Australia, what they're doing. In fact, Australia is very interesting because their battery setup that Musk put in is being recharged by renewables, by wind power. So, gee, somebody couldn't have thought of that 20 years ago, right? I mean, we always got that crap of, oh, what are you going to do when the sun don't shine and the wind don't blow? Ha ha ha. Well, if you build them together, nothing. Because we'll have it when the sun shines and we'll have it when the wind don't blow. Our reply back to them is, what are you going to do when the water's not there?
Okay. Roger has a question, so we'll go to him in a moment. But Michael had a quick question about the National, I think it's Renewable Energy Laboratory, which has been focused on solar. What's their position on nuclear energy, if you know that? And then we'll go to Roger for an open question.
I do not know. I really do not know.
They've been focused on solar, so I don't know if they have an official position or
Probably
not.
not. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I'll report back sometime. Okay.
Some of these labs do they're one of the all of the above sources too. And Argonne National Laboratory is a good example of that. They're affiliated with the University of Chicago, and the lab is just outside of Chicago. But out in Idaho, they have an affiliate lab that deals with nuclear reactors and nuclear waste. So while here in Illinois, they're researching energy efficiency and battery storage, out in Idaho, they're researching nuclear reactors. So you're going to find that with labs, whether they're national labs or private labs.
Roger,
I don't know what any are.
Roger, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. David, thank you very much. This has been fascinating. I think you're kinder than I am in never doubting people's good intentions. But what I wanted to ask you about was the role that fossil fuel companies may be playing in this. When I look at your data and the tiny reductions in overall greenhouse gas emissions that we're getting out of all this nuclear investment, it seems that the fossil fuel people must be delighted by those numbers because it means they get to continue their monopoly. Have you looked at the connections between the money behind this and the money that's coming out of the various fossil fuel promoters, especially groups like Koch or Exxon? They must be pumping money into this nonsense around nuclear as the salvation.
Well, yeah, you know, we could have done a whole slideshow on what I call nuclear politics and nuclear corruption. In fact, we're actually having a kind of an in-house webinar with activists on the Great Lakes on Monday nights about this because of all those scandals that I listed in the slideshow. I can probably respond to it by examples rather than, you know, like definite blocks of knowledge. But yes, number one for sure, the fossil fuel folks and the nuclear folks have been duking it out for a while, especially at the state level. Here in Illinois, the Sierra Club and 100 other organizations have a campaign going to really eliminate the fossil fuel industry. So of course they're fighting back and they're saying, hey, look, the nuclear guys got bailed out. How come we're not getting bailed out? And so everybody is a cannibal, and the cannibals always eat the cannibals, and they're always going to be opportunistic in the way they do it. Exelon, again, is a perfect example of that. They're touting themselves in our state legislature now as, oh, we need to stay on a line to, how do they put it? It's a great euphemism. Oh, to reward we are not appropriately rewarded for the environmental benefits that we provide. That's what they say to the legislators. We are clean, green, and emissions free. Now, I could do a whole slideshow on clean, green, and emissions free too, but I don't think 11,000 tons of radioactive waste sitting on the shores of Illinois rivers is clean, or 1,000 tons on the shore of Lake Michigan within 8 minutes of O'Hare Field. You know, that's not clean, and it's going to last a couple 100,000 years. Well, anyway, so the point is, yes, you are at the crux of the problem is that both of these industries have well-placed lobbyists in DC that are going to continue this bullshit about them having a role to play in meeting the energy future. And so since 2013, when we have met with our state legislators, we have been trying to introduce a new concept to them. We're telling them, look, we know you guys are legislators. You got to make decisions in the short term or you don't get elected. We understand your problem, but the world doesn't care. Climate change doesn't care. And we not only don't need an energy transformation, which is very incremental and very linear, and everybody gets something, and you know, all the R&D money gets sprinkled around, you know, like fairy. That's over. We need what's called a transformation. And transformations, we have to start using this word. It is a transformative moment. It is not a transitional moment. Because in transformations, industries go away. You do pick and choose the ones that are better or not. People will get hurt unless they are properly prepared for and compensated for the pain that they're going to endure. And there I'm referring to the just transitions piece, where we have to take care of the coal communities, the mining communities, and the nuclear communities when these plants shut down. So this is one of our responses to the whole huge problem, Roger, that's the real problem. I've always said to people, nuclear power has nothing to do with electrons. It has everything to do with influence and money. And you have no farther to look than the Obama administration, because Obama came out of Illinois and Illinois politics was governed by ComEd Exelon Corporation. His biggest donors were John Rowe, chairman of the board of Exelon. You know, they had all sorts of PACs that were involved with that. I mean, that's the problem. That's the problem. So transformation, that's what we got to sell. And one way that we sell it is, could we also introduce a bill that will bail out blacksmiths, butter churn makers, Conestoga wagon manufacturers, and clipper ship salesmen? And if you can't, then you can't bail out Exelon.
Very good. By the way, for those interested, Leah did put a link in the chat to that historic Bill Gates TED Talk that Dave referenced.
Thanks for finding it.
Yeah, and Tom had two questions. Actually, he had a point. You mentioned, Dave, that there are missions on the back end in terms of nuclear waste that's not free or devoid of externalities, like environmentally and economically. But also on the front end, Tom rightly pointed out that uranium fuel mining itself involves fossil fuel emissions and the process of mining. So up front as well as at the end are our externalities. His question, though, is on the risk management going forward for those that are going to need to be, normally and safely decommissioned, the 408 operating nuclear plants. And there's also a related, or we can shoehorn it into being related, Landholt's question about grid deficiencies and the sort of roadmap for updating the grid in terms of the needs of the future, no matter how the energy is generated.
All right. So let's see. Let's start with the externality piece, the before and after. A whole other slideshow we could do is nuclear power is not clean, green, and free. And we point out that you have to examine the entire carbon footprint of every energy resource too. And that's been done numerous times. And the problem with that is, of course, it's a GIGO situation, garbage in, garbage out. Any model you pick is going to be subject to the constraints of whatever assumptions you build into it. So I've seen everything from the nuclear industry and the Nuclear Energy Institute claiming nuclear has a smaller footprint than anything except wind, to people like Sovacool and others who say, forget that, that's crazy. Nuclear's footprint is much bigger because you forgot this, 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 and this. So it's a war, and you have to examine every study carefully as to the inputs that they've put and the assumptions they've made to get to their conclusion. So that's a preamble. That said, yes, we have carboned the whole nuclear footprint like crazy. Uranium mining, and again, uranium mining is a serious environmental justice issue, because who gets mined are the Diné in New Mexico and Arizona and Colorado, the Lakota in South Dakota, the Cree up in Canada, the Tuareg tribe in Niger, the Aborigines in Australia. They're the ones who are dealing with the uranium mining issues, because we left it for them. We're the ones who contaminated their water with mill tailings and stuff like that. So unless those costs are built into your analysis, you're not talking anything. So uranium mining is significant. It's carbon based, obviously, because all those machines run on the liquid fuels required to do it. And then you're left in the end of the day with 250 million tons of uranium mill tailings unremediated with no place to go, and 10,000 abandoned uranium mines in the Southwest. That's a carbon footprint. Going in the other direction, you're right. All those reactors at some point are going to have to be torn down. And then what? Where do you take it to? Well, currently, the two reactors that they scraped off of the shore of Lake Michigan here in Illinois at Zion, all of that rubble has ended up in Utah because a private company had the land to host it. And so nobody could argue against it. So all of that rubble, and that's not the necessarily contaminated, highly contaminated stuff. The real issue people are concerned about is the spent fuel. The fuel that has been accumulating with no place to go because we never built the disposal facility for it. Not just here, but any place else on the planet except sort of Finland. So that waste is going to have to be, well, if not actively monitored and safeguarded, we're at least going to have to remember it for tens of thousands of years, which we believe has a social impact and cost, which is not built into the calculation of either the carbon footprint or the cost of nuclear power. Then you have the issue again with spent fuel, and this is the one that really concerns us, is the proliferation aspect. Now, there are better ways of getting the plutonium you need to make bombs than spent fuel. But you don't have to make a nuclear bomb out of spent fuel. It's its own bomb if you decide to detonate something that will unleash it on the surrounding communities. And that's where the rub comes in. We're going to have this big fight over, let's get it out of the reactor communities fast and send it somewhere where nobody lives, like Texas or New Mexico, you know, out of sight, out of mind, right? And so that's going to be the big fight. And our position on that, since 2001, where we met with 98 other environmental groups in Connecticut, is what we're going to have to do for now is the lesser of evil choices. We are going to have to do what's called hardened on-site storage. It's an enhanced version of what they're already doing to store the waste at the reactor sites, but it's much more safe, we believe, than what they're currently doing until we actually have a fully functioning and operating disposal facility. And our organization believes it's got to be a sort of a file and forget thing. We can't allow it to have access, you know, to the future because it's just too deadly a material. The other problem with the nuclear waste, though, internationally, is looking where they are talking about siting these nuclear reactors, either the new ones or the old ones. It boggles the mind that the Ukrainians still want to build more nuclear reactors. And regrettably, it's in the part of the country that borders Russia. Now, some of you whose memory still hasn't faded too badly might recall there was a little war going on there a few years ago. Do we really want to site nuclear reactors in war zones? Another country that really is hot to trot on building nuclear reactors is Indonesia, which is the site of history's largest volcanic eruption, which almost wiped out the human race 70,000 years ago. And not to mention all the earthquakes, tidal waves, tsunamis that accompany, you know, being on the ring of fire. You know, so yeah, there is a carbon footprint issue on the decommissioning part and what to do with the waste. You know, what did Einstein say? Clever people solve problems, geniuses avoid them. Our job is to avoid future nuclear so that we don't have to solve the problems or what to do with the waste eventually. So that may be an insufficient answer or an unsatisfying one, but we're looking in both directions. We have made concrete proposals. We've been ignored at the powers that be, but we'll keep at it. What was the second part now? I went a long time on this one. There's a second question.
Oh, I think you answered it, Richard, and I'm Dave, excuse me. And we are exactly at the time we allocated to wrap up and move to the next part of the presentation. But it was a very eye-opening, enlightening talk, and we are all grateful for it. Please, everybody, join me in some virtual applause for Dave's expertise and insights.
Again, if you have questions, the email is in the Save Your Chat box. Make sure you get the contact info. We'll be glad to get back to you. My intention is we're going to be training some of our people on how to give this slideshow. If that would ever interest some of your folks, because I mean, I know you're in the Climate Reality Project. I have this photo of me handing Al Gore that book that was in the slideshow here, Carbon Free, Nuclear Free, and there was a DVD I gave him too about this as well, in Group 4, saying, look, Al, we can't have nuclear, you know, in our moving forward in the climate crisis. So if this is something that might interest some of you as individuals, contact me and we'll see if we can set up a virtual training on it. So thank you all again for
Appreciate it.
Saturday afternoon.
All right. And now we'll turn it over to Lynn, I believe.
First, we want to give Roger a couple of minutes to introduce Lynn and the new segment that we are having here. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just first express my appreciation to Dave for this presentation. I can't quite imagine a better way for the chapter to kick off the year than with this presentation. This was fascinating, very informative. It's gotten me fired up again, and I appreciate it greatly. Thanks also to Chip and to Dan who worked to put this together, and everybody else who's been arranging the meetings. So I want to, we have one more little piece to the meeting. We are aiming to keep our meetings more time limited this year in response to lots of comments that our meetings were getting too long. People couldn't devote that much time on a Saturday, but we're going to have a regular new piece at the end. It's modeled a little bit on the opening that we've had coming from the creatives for several months. But let me set a little context for this new piece of our meetings. During the summer in the global trainings, one of the things that really stunned me in my work with other chapter chairs and other mentors from around the whole southeastern part of the US is how many chapters were going dormant, closing their doors, going out of business. And you heard the statistics back in the November meeting that last year, in spite of opening many, many new chapters after the global training, Climate Reality actually lost more chapters than it opened new chapters. I learned today the two new co-chairs of the Austin chapter, which has been trying to get itself off the ground for about 6 months, have both declared at the start of the year that they're not continuing, and that chapter is likely to go dormant again. Then in November, after the election, despite the fact that Biden won, chairs all over the country began to report that their members were feeling exhausted, depleted, depressed, discouraged, disheartened. Lots of them, like lots of you, had put in tremendous amounts of effort in voter registration work, and then in get out the vote work. And when the election finally was over, to the extent that it's ever been over, people just felt like, on top of the pandemic, I'm just out of gas. Climate Reality took note of that at the national level. They immediately rolled out a couple toolkits on the hub. And just this past week, I know that I attended, I know that some others in this chapter were on the call. Climate Reality had a training program with a psychologist on how to deal with burnout. But I had already been thinking about the role that chapters can play in this problem. I think that we have to take this issue seriously, and this is not just an individual problem as I see it. Burnout to me doesn't live inside individuals. It lives inside communities. We need to build a chapter, and I think we've done some of this, but we need to all participate in building a chapter where we lift each other up, where we provide encouragement when we notice that some of the people around us are getting burned out, pooped, exhausted, depleted, whatever language you might want to use for it. So along with Karen Magruder, who, as all of you know, I think teaches social work at the University of Texas in Arlington. I'm an old psychologist long ago, and a group of people that we've just started to assemble. We're going to start doing a regular series on self-care for activists. Would love to have others participating in our group. We're up on the website now. Get in touch with me, get in touch with Karen. We're going to do several things, but one of them is a very short piece at the end of the meetings. Somebody from our group is going to do a little teaching, a little exercise, a little contribution of some kind aimed at self-care for all of you. So one of our new members, Lynn Garavaglia, has stepped into the breach with applause to kick us off. I think with my gratitude, she's going to say something to us about gratitude. Following that, Jeff Liu is going to give you an opportunity to do the new chapter survey. So if you can stick around for that, please do. But I'm going to pass the mic now over to Lynn for the first contribution from the Self-Care for Activists group. Lynn, over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Roger. Hi, guys. I've gone over this 1,000 times in my head, but I'm kind of nervous. So it's not specifically going to be on gratitude. That was something I had thought about, but I really like how we started the meeting with that saying, and it talked about connectedness. So I'm just going to share my screen. Do I share desktop? Yeah. Okay. What's going on here? Oh.
You can share one thing or everything.
Oh, hold on. Okay. Sorry, hold on. I've never done this before. This is my first time in sharing. So I can't get to my, oh, here it is, sorry. Okay.
Lynn, do you see the share screen? It should be in green.
Yes, let me find my, if I pull up my PowerPoint, then how do then I just go to share?
Mm-hmm. And then
okay,
the PowerPoint window.
Okay. Okay, so here's my PowerPoint window, and then I go to share. And I share application or desktop, sorry.
Application, you can just
oh,
right.
Okay, got it. Okay. Oh, it's not here. I'm sorry, guys. It's not on here. Put it up. Okay. I'm sorry. I can't. I don't know. I should have practiced.
A solution would be you can send that to me, and Jeff is right.
Yes.
Jeff can go ahead and talk about the survey for 5 minutes while
No. Well, let me talk about what I was going to say.
Okay.
Can I? Yeah, I can talk about it. I'm sorry. I can't figure out. It comes up. My husband told me what to do, and apparently I can't figure it out. But so kind of what I wanted to touch on was passion and connection. And it was, I did attend that, the climate reality little seminar thing she did. And that doctor was talking a lot about passion. And I think one way to reignite passion in what we're doing is to have this connection. And that's what was said earlier in that saying, is how we're connected to everything. So the way I try to feel connected for me is whenever I read something or hear something that really touches me, you know, it's kind of a meditation on the reading or what I've heard. And that really fills me with feeling and spirit, or whatever you want to call it, that connects you to give you strength to, you know, be connected to everything and go on, because I really do think that we are connected. So I had a couple sayings that I had found that really touched me, and I was hoping I could share them with you. And then maybe the exercise would be like to do a little bit of meditation or writing on it, and we could put it on the blog, because we're really trying to add things to the blog for us all to stay connected. So my first saying is from Friedrich Schelling, which he was a German philosopher. I myself, quote, I myself am identical with nature. And that really struck me, because that makes me feel like I'm one and the same. I would have this on the PowerPoint, but I can't get it. My other one is from one of my favorite poets. Maybe a lot of you feel connected through reading poetry, and my favorite poet ever is Khalil Gibran. And his saying that touched me was, quote, trees are poems that earth writes upon the sky. Now that's not the whole quote, because it goes into something else, but these are things that help me, like I said, feel connected and then ignite a passion. So that was my little presentation. I'm so sorry I couldn't get my slides up so you could have actually seen the quote, wrote it down. Do I need to say the quotes again if anyone needs it? No?
The last one, please.
Sure. So this is Khalil Gibran, which if you've never read him, holy cow. Trees are poems that earth writes upon the sky.
The first one again, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Part of it. It was something about I am one with nature.
I myself am identical with nature. Identical. That's what got me.
I love it. Thank you. I really, really appreciate hearing those two. And I think what is going on with so many people is that we're so involved with our phones and our Facebook and our technological gadgetry that we are forgetting the thing we love the most is the earth and the sunshine and the plants and fresh air. And those two poems really excite me for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for including me and letting me share. I'm so sorry about the PowerPoint again. I made a whole PowerPoint.
Lynn, can I throw in a comment? If you would send me those quotes, which I already have, I've already started the blog post for that, but anything else you want me to include in that, I'd be glad to add to the post coming up, and I'll post it in the next few minutes. Also, I'd just remind people, we have lots of good entries on the blogs. And in fact, Karen did one that has a lot of great content on taking care of yourself. Gives a whole bunch of actually things to do, things to look for. So please look at the blog and give some feedback to either you like it, want some your own content loaded. If you'll just let me know, I usually put it up within a day or so. So please look at that. Rogers recently put some stuff up about some more philosophy. He's done a couple of these. They are great reading. I think you should look at them. If they aren't energizing to you, if you read them, they probably would be.
Thank you so much, Lynn, for that. Very helpful. Now, Jeff has the last part of the meeting before we have a couple of closing comments, if any, from Leah and Simon, our vice chairs. Jeff, were you going to put the link to the survey in the chat box, or going to ask people to take the survey now?
Yes, I'm planning to do that. So first of all, just want to give everyone a little background about the survey. So we're looking for members' input every year in order to make our chapter better and work more efficiently. And most importantly, we need your input in order to help the chapter to grow and direct, based on how the chapter can help each of the member identify their best interests in order to be involved in the chapter. So consider last year's surveying success. The methodology we used was kind of give everyone the survey link during our chapter meeting, and that actually generate and pull a lot of responses. So just to copy that strategy, using it for this year, I'm gonna be sharing the survey link inside the chat right here. And if you don't have time to stick around for 5 minutes for the survey, no worries. We will also be sending out the survey link to your email address after this call. So don't feel like you have to take it right now, but you're highly encouraged to do so if you have the time. And again, if you have any questions or any additional input in regards to helping the chapter to grow, or you feel like there's any other aspect that are not being captured in your survey that you wish to help out with the chapter, please feel free to contact me directly or any other exec members. So already posted a link in the Zoom chat right here. If you guys want to just click on it, spend 5 minutes, gather your response, that would be great. If you also have any questions or tech challenges in order to access this survey, please also reach out to me directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. So we're almost making our 90-minute limit, and I'll ask Leah or Simon if they have any short closing comments to wrap up the meeting before we adjourn, and maybe some of us can take the survey.
Simon, go ahead. I already said so much today.
I don't have anything special to add. I'd just like to thank everybody for presenting today, everybody for coming. For anyone who's a trained climate leader who needs to log in active leadership, we got up to a total of 40 participants today. So that's a number you can plug into your active leadership. And as we go into 2021, I know everybody's really dedicated and trying to get this fight won, and it can be difficult. If anybody has an idea and they're needing some help working on their plan for their individual activism, everyone is welcome to hit me up, reach out to me, and I can help you with that. Anytime, like within the next month or two would be better before we get to like midterms. But that being said, anybody needs anything, always reach out. And thank you everybody for coming, everybody for setting up the meeting. So that's what I got.
Wonderful, thank you. So stay on if you can to take the survey and ask questions of Jeff. If not, we'll see you next month. Third Saturday next month, we'll have interesting speaker and another program. Thank you again. Stay safe.
I do have one more thing to say. I just want to let everybody know we'll be rolling out monthly yoga starting in February. I'll be teaching them. So get your cardio on. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But next month, and that'll be a week after our next meeting. So stay tuned. Emails will be coming from us. Otherwise, have a great weekend, guys. Do the survey.
Bye-bye.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
You too.